Wouldn't it be great to know your glucose levels all day long and all night long, and to know what makes glucose rise and what causes it to fall? When does it rise? When does it fall? Well, I can't tell you about your glucose levels, but I can show you mine. Recently, I used the Freestyle Libre continuous glucose monitor for 2 weeks. I purchased one scanner and one sensor, and I used it for the 14 days before that sensor expired. And not only did I get interesting results and good results in terms of scanning it, but also that thing is recording your glucose when you're not even aware of it. Every 15 minutes, it's taking another record of your glucose levels. And there's a way of checking it to see how your glucose levels went throughout the day or throughout the night. And so today, I'm going to share with you how mine went over several different days and during this 14-day period, and then we'll talk about some of the averages. So we're going to start with that 36-hour fast I did. I ate on Sunday evening, and then I fasted all day Monday and didn't eat again until Tuesday morning. So about 36 hours. Let's take a look at what my graph looked like over that Monday where I didn't eat. You can see that it's dropping well below that blue bar. Now that bar that's straight across the graph is the record of what my targeted range was. When you first program your scanner, it wants to know, what do you want to set as your target? So I put 100 to 140. And so that's what that represents. That blue bar represents 100 at the bottom, 140 at the top. And so as you look at the graph, you can see that I was below that practically the whole day. I barely seemed to touch the top of it, right around maybe 10 a.m. And then it started going down, 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 and stayed low throughout the day, and actually got fairly low toward the evening and by the 12 midnight time. Well, of course, this is one of the reasons you would want to fast, is to bring your levels, not only your glucose levels, but even your insulin levels, way down for an extended period of time. So here, as you can see from this graph, my glucose was below my targeted range, fairly significantly lower than that, all day long. And it would have been in the next morning as well, as we're going to see. So for Monday, I spent an entire day with glucose lower than normal. And that's a good thing. That's a positive thing. And I spent an entire day with insulin lower than normal as well. All right, let's look at Tuesday. This would be the day following. And one of the interesting things about Tuesday is that there was almost no bounce in my glucose level for my breakfast. I don't even, I should have written all this down. I don't even remember what I had for breakfast, but normally my breakfasts are not very high carb. But as you look at Tuesday morning from 12 a.m. all the way through 6, you see no spike, really, no spike. There's a slight drift upwards from about 6 a.m. through 12 p.m., but not really much of a spike to speak of, and I'm still below that 100 range, 100 milligrams per deciliter. I know some of you in Europe are saying, what in the world is that? And I'm sorry, but you're going to have to do the calculations to figure that out in your own measurements. And in fact, around 12 p.m., it dips a little bit and then goes up. Now, one thing I need to say is that I normally have late lunches, and because my breakfast usually is fairly late, although on the days that I'm coming off a fast, I would probably eat a lot sooner. But somehow on Tuesday, there was really no spike at all to speak of, just a slight drifting upward in the morning. Finally, it starts to hit the 100 mark, probably around 2 p.m., and hangs out there for an hour or a little more, and then starts to dip down once again. By 6, it's somewhat below the 100 mark. And then that would have been around the time I had dinner, or maybe 6:30, 6:45. I'm not precise to the minute with my dinners. I kind of have a general target of 6:15 or so, but I don't always achieve that. And then you notice there's really, although it does drift up somewhat, you could hardly call it a spike because it kind of hangs out right around the 100 level for the rest of the evening and on till about midnight. So Tuesday was a great day as well as Monday. Monday, you look at Monday, well below the line throughout the day. Tuesday, most of the day below the line. And when it does get up to the line, it just barely touches the bottom of the line, which would represent 100 milligrams per deciliter. So the fast not only did me good on Monday, but it did me good on Tuesday, and I ate 3 meals on Tuesday. I had breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Not my normal butter coffee, as I would on most days, but I actually had a real breakfast, and it didn't do much. So my 36-hour fast on Monday did me good on Tuesday as well. Let's take a look at Wednesday. Wednesday, we can see that my numbers are dropping throughout the evening. That first 12 is 12 a.m., and you look at it all the way up to 6 a.m., and it's just going down. It goes slightly up at 6. Now, I normally wake up somewhere between 6 a.m. and 7. So one thing I don't experience much of is the dawn effect when I first wake up. Some people say when I went to bed with a 95 and I woke up with a 150 or a 160. I almost never wake up with a super high glucose level. I don't experience that much dawn effect at that point. However, I will often experience a drifting upwards from the morning when I have my butter coffee or bulletproof coffee until I eat my lunch. And if you look at Wednesday, you can see that's exactly what's happening. On Wednesday, I would have had bulletproof coffee probably around 9 a.m. And so it had started to drift up even before I had that coffee. It continued to drift up somewhat until it hits around 12, and then it starts to go slightly down. Now, I almost never eat at 12, so that the 12 mark does not mean I had a meal then. Some people think of lunch as noon, but I never eat at noon, almost never, unless I have something where I have to leave in a hurry. You do see a fairly good rise right around, I suppose, 4 to 4:30. So I had a lunch on Wednesday, but the lunch was probably around 1:45, 2, and it lifts it up to perhaps 135 or so. Remember, the top of the bar would represent 140 milligrams per deciliter. It gets it about halfway, so maybe 120, 125. Then it goes down after 6, and then it levels off. I don't know what I had for supper, but apparently, or dinner, we Missourians call it supper, but whatever it was, it didn't do hardly anything to my blood sugar, and it just kind of hangs out right around that 100 mark throughout the evening until we get close to midnight, and then it starts to go down slightly. So there's an example of how some of my days go, and they're fairly typical. I wasn't really trying to be too, a real good boy and eat specially unusual just so I could get good numbers. I was eating low carb like I normally do. Let's take a look at the average glucose, and this is useful. The Freestyle Libre has a lot of useful things, and there's one thing I need to tell you. It will record every 15 minutes. You don't have to scan it to record, but it won't keep that information if you don't scan yourself every 8 hours. So while it's on your arm, even if you don't scan for 6 hours, it's recording your glucose, so it can make these graphs for you every 15 minutes. But if you go over 8 hours, it forgets everything it just recorded. And I don't know why they do that, but that's how it works, as I understand it. It forgets everything, and so you've lost it. But I was scanning myself so often, I didn't really have to worry about that, and I almost never sleep 8 hours. And usually the first thing I do when I wake up is test my glucose when I have that scanner. When I'm using strips, I don't do that every day. And so it had a good record of where my glucose was going. As we look at the averages, it's pretty much what you could expect. From 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., so while I was sleeping mostly, and I have to confess, I don't get to bed early. I'm often working right up until midnight. I guess you could say burning the midnight oil. And I'll usually try to go to bed at midnight. Sometimes I make it by 11:30, but not too often. Anyway, from 12 to 6, 86 was my average for those 14 days the sensor was on. From 6 to 12, my average was 93. That would be the morning time up until noon. And then from 12 to 6, which would be the afternoon, was my highest average. That was 100. And then from 6 p.m. to 12, it went down slightly to 97. So you may ask, Dennis, why was the 12 to 6 p.m. your highest number? And the answer is actually pretty simple. That's when I eat my highest carb meals. When I say highest carb, I'm not talking about eating lasagna and having a big cherry pie at the end and all that. But still, I'll eat a few more carbs at my lunchtime than at my supper. Now, this is not just because I happen to love to pig out at lunch. It is because I want my dinner to be lighter than my lunch. I don't always achieve that, but that's what I want. I want it to be less carbs than my lunch so that I can cruise on into the evening with a lower glucose, and then my numbers can drop down while I sleep and keep under that 100 mark if at all possible. So that's by design. I will normally eat my highest carb meal, which compared to most Americans wouldn't be high carb at all, but for me, it's higher carb than the others. I'll eat that at lunchtime, or usually around 1:32 p.m. So this perfectly coincides with the way I eat and what I would have expected. Lowest numbers were as I slept, and then after that, the morning. Again, most mornings I'm having bulletproof coffee, but still my numbers are drifting up a bit. So that's where I experience the dawn effect a bit. Is not really when I wake up. There's not much dawn effect going on then for me. Now, it may be different for you, but for me, there's not much dawn effect going on. A little bit, not much. But where I notice the dawn effect is I can get up and just have some bulletproof coffee, and it still kind of drifts up slowly at some points. So that's just the way it works. It's not bad. Some people, they have terrible dawn effect where they go to bed with a 95, get up with a 160. I never have that, but I do have some, and I think everybody's going to have some. Even people that aren't even close to diabetic are going to have some. Well, it's good to know what's going on in your body. There's a lot of things you cannot know. Cancer is a scary thing, and nobody knows if they have cancer or not. Sometimes you've maybe had cancer for some time, and it's starting to spread, and suddenly the doctor tells you, and there's not much you can do, or maybe he or she can do, because you didn't know it. You can't look at your body and say, well, do I have cancer or not? There are some tests you can take. And there are a lot of things like that you have no idea what's really going on inside your body. But with glucose, you can know, my friend, and you don't need a Freestyle Libre to get these kind of numbers and this kind of a picture. You can just test like crazy with Mike the Meter, a regular traditional glucose meter where you prick your finger and get the blood drop. You can still get that, but it's such a pain, and it's so simple and easy, and this keeps such a beautiful record even while you sleep, which is something nobody's going to do. We're not going to get up every 15 minutes and test ourselves with Mike the Meter. We just will not do that. Nobody I know would do it. Maybe there's a few fanatics that would, but I sure wouldn't, and never have, never will. But with Charlie, the CGM, he doesn't ever sleep. He will test you every 15 minutes, and as I understand it, the Libre 2, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Libre 2 tests you every single minute and keeps a record of it. So that's even better still. So it's good to know what's going on, and you can know. And again, my advice is if you can at all afford it, get a CGM and get these kind of records and check them out and see what's going on with your blood sugar. Not only will you know more, you'll be more motivated to make the changes you need. There is one thing I want to point out to you. If you look at the daily graphs of my glucose, the spikes always come an hour or two after my meals. Wherever you see a serious spike, you can bet I ate a meal an hour or two before. And that is the pattern for all of our lives. Eat a meal, glucose goes up. Don't eat for a few hours, glucose comes back down. Eat, raise glucose, stop eating, lower glucose. This is the rhythm of our bodies. Now, that's something I already knew, but many diabetics have not yet figured that one out. That simple truth that says the foods we eat cause the glucose spikes. And the more carbohydrates we eat, the higher the glucose spikes. Now, when you really get this, when you understand that what you put in your mouth is going to have a direct correlation to the high glucose numbers on your meter, and eventually the high numbers on your A1C test, it will prompt you to have certain strange thoughts. One thought you might have is, if only I didn't have to eat, then I could really have some great glucose levels. But of course, that's not possible. One major truth in nature is that people or animals that don't eat will die. So that's out. You got to eat. And that leads to another thought. If only I could live on certain foods that don't spike blood sugar, that would surely fix things for me. Well, now you're getting a little closer to reality. But there's only one class of foods that don't raise blood sugar at all, or at least barely raise it, and that has to do with fat. But it's not realistic to live on pure fat all your life. You can't have a big glass of olive oil for breakfast, 3 sticks of butter for lunch, and a big bowl of bacon grease for supper. Nor is it necessary. Some people try to get to the closest thing to a no-glucose spike situation with a carnivore diet, and they eat nothing but meat and animal products, and clearly that can work, and many seem to thrive on it. But I've never been persuaded that an all-meat diet is either necessary or optimum. And that brings us to a third diet that works to keep glucose levels in line, which is a diet of foods such as meat, eggs, cheese, cream, nuts, seeds, and low-carb vegetables, the kind you might find in a garden salad or a Cobb salad. Now, you may say, yeah, Dennis, but with these, you'll get a glucose rise. Yeah, you will, but not a big glucose rise. And let me give you a news flash. The goal of your life is not to never have a glucose rise. Your body has been created to handle small, moderate, gentle glucose rises. You should be able to live to be an old man or an old woman with these small, gentle glucose rises and never become a diabetic or even get close to diabetes. Bumping from 90 milligrams per deciliter to 120 or 125 after a meal is no big deal. Bumping up to 215 an hour after you eat is a really big deal. In my case, with these meals that I ate, I definitely saw a rise in glucose. But I never saw one that went over 140, that marker that I've set as a target for myself. And most of the time, my glucose spike came well short of it. The way that I'm able to keep my glucose levels in line and under control is very simple. There's basically a 3-pronged plan that I use to make sure I'm on target. Number 1, I simply don't stuff myself with carbohydrates. I eat significantly fewer carbs than most Americans would. If you took a survey of the people in my town, I'd probably be in the top 2% of those who eat the fewest carbs. Probably something like an average of 40 to 50 net grams of carbs per day. A second part of my plan is most days of the week, usually 5, I eat all my meals within about a 6-hour window. By 7 p.m., that window slams shut, and I don't eat again until around 1 p.m. the next day, apart from some bulletproof coffee in the place of breakfast in the morning. And prong number 3 of my plan is I do some longer fasts to fine-tune my metabolic system, usually 36 hours, sometimes 24. So should you do exactly as I do? No, not at all. We all have to experiment and test ourselves and find out what works for us. Your eating plan may look different from mine. But one thing we all need to come to is a state where our numbers are no longer diabetic. And ideally, we have an A1C in the 5s, or a few blessed people can get down into the upper 4s. So a CGM that can track your glucose levels and let you know how you're doing can be an important tool in getting to your goal of beating diabetes. If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our Uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our Uploads page is in the description.